Welcome to POTUS 2016. We are here each week calling the presidential horse race and inviting scholars to pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Today, we search for proven gun control policies that might prevent tragedies like last week's in Roseburg, Oregon, as well as some of the 90 gun deaths per day in this country. President Obama believes there are such life-saving policies, but speaking to the nation, he somberly predicted nothing will change until gun politics changes, and that the people, not the president, will have to do it.
And it will require that the American people, individually, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, when you decide to vote for somebody, are making a determination as to whether this cause of continuing death for innocent people should be a relevant factor in your decision.
Suddenly, violently, gun control has become part of the presidential horse race. So let's take a deep breath and get to it. Joining us for the horse race segment of the program this week on how the candidates are responding to the community college shooting, Paul Barrett, the author of Glock, The Rise of America's Gun, and via Skype from Washington, Slate's chief political correspondent, Jamelle Bouie. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks, Brian.
And let me just start by saying that the Democrats are suddenly owning this issue. I want to show a mashup of what some candidates are saying. This is not made by some YouTuber, but by the Democratic National Committee. Check it out.
It cannot be this easy for somebody who wants to inflict harm on other people to get his or her hands on a gun.
You're always going to have problems.
When Americans are killed in mine disasters, we work to make mine safer.
Stuff happens. There's always a crisis. And the impulse is always to do something, and it's not necessarily the right thing to do.
When Americans are killed in floods and hurricanes, we make communities safer.
You're not going to handle it with more gun control.
When roads are unsafe, we fix them.
Before we start calling for more laws, I think we ought to consider why we don't enforce the laws we have.
Each time this happens, I am going to say that we can actually do something about it, but we're going to have to change our laws.
I can tell you that I always find it interesting that the reflexive reaction of the left is to say we need more gun laws.
So, Paul Barrett, in your years following guns and gun politics, is there something new here that a mashup like that was produced by the Democratic National Committee, which I think has been kind of running away from the issue for years and years?
Yeah. Well, what is new here, I think, is Hillary Clinton. Mrs. Clinton has decided that she is going to put this issue forward and make it, you know, if not her top issue, then one of her top 5 issues. And it's been a long time since we've seen that. President Obama, as you indicated, was silent about guns during his first term and only really began to speak up fairly tentatively after the Newtown massacre in December of 2012. So
after his reelection.
After his reelection, when he wasn't going to be running again, presumably for anything ever. So you're absolutely right. There is a new factor, and the new factor is the Democratic frontrunner.
All right, so before we go to you, Jamelle, I want to play a clip of Hillary Clinton since Paul singled her out, and here she is the other day, and notice what the big applause line is.
We also must address the very serious problem of military-style weapons on our streets. And you know, people don't really have a chance. You know, lots of times when terrible murders like this take place, somebody will say, well, you know, if we only had more guns. You're walking to class. You're driving your baby around in a car seat. You're going to church. And somebody has an automatic weapon, or even worse, an assault weapon that is a military instrument of war, and you're somehow supposed to be able to stop that with your own gun? That has never made any sense. And so from my perspective...
So, Jamelle Bouie, Slate's chief political correspondent, is Hillary Clinton going, oh my goodness, I can't believe I have to address this losing issue now because of what happened in Oregon? Or does she see this as an opportunity to prove she's a progressive fighter?
I think it's more the latter. I think the Clinton team believes that guns have moved away from being a divisive issue for the entire electorate, and that the people who are most driven by guns to vote for Republicans are people who wouldn't be voting for Democrats anyway. And so there's this sort of large middle, not exactly passionate about guns, but unhappy about mass shootings, that I think the Clinton team thinks it can appeal to, and kind of appeal to on the issue of safety, to say that, listen, guns threaten the safety of your children and your family.
But is gun control really the right issue to win a general election? Let's look at some polling, folks. First, who supports background checks for all gun buyers? This is a Quinnipiac poll. Democrats in blue, Republicans in red, and independents in orange. On the left, which is the data from 2 years ago, 80% to 90% in both parties support background checks for all gun buyers. The gray bars, everybody averaged. On the right is the newer data compiled last month, taller towers. So does this mean there is growing bipartisan support to clamp down on guns? Not quite. If pollsters ask not about universal background checks, but do you support or oppose stricter gun control laws, about 70% of Democrats still say yes, but roughly 70% of Republicans jump to the other side and say no. And independents are suddenly divided about 50-50. I guess this means the country overwhelmingly wants background checks, but is split if you call them gun control. So maybe it's not such a winning issue politically, Paul Barrett, or maybe it just depends on the language you use.
Well, I think when it comes to polling, the language you use is vital. However, I think there's a deeper issue here that those statistics point to, and that is that in our current structure, with a very committed minority interest group, the pro-gun movement, which is a real movement, unlike the anti-gun movement, which is a much more diffuse set of opinions in a broader segment of the population. Framing this debate as one about gun control in the abstract, I think, remains a losing issue. And I think liberals would be very wise to rethink that from the ground up and think about what we're actually trying to prevent. We are not trying to prevent law-abiding people from owning firearms in a law-abiding way. There's nothing wrong with guns per se. What we're trying to do is stop various categories of crime. So let's construct an anti-crime agenda based on the good experiences we've had in certain jurisdictions, such as New York, just to choose one arbitrarily. And let's enforce the laws we have, fix laws that are already on the books by fixing obvious flaws in them. And many of Hillary Clinton's ideas can flow into that anti-crime agenda. And you don't have to demean people who are fascinated by guns.
Jamelle, what would you add to this? And why do you think it's so confusing to people when the term gun control is used, that that's not the same as background checks, which is almost all that anybody ever talks about in terms of gun control the last 5 years?
I mean, I think gun control just is a term that carries these negative connotations, and there's no avoiding them. And that I think for advocates of sort of greater gun regulation, something just frankly just stating the policy outright, not necessarily saying gun control, is probably the better strategy. I agree that if we want to solve the problem or reduce gun violence overall, framing this not just in terms of crime but in public health is probably the right choice. The vast majority of gun deaths, or not the vast majority, but the good majority of gun deaths, are suicides and accidents. I think there are ways. It's not just I think there are ways to reduce those deaths without even getting close to the idea of restricting gun ownership. And when it comes to the other source of gun deaths, which is mainly violent crime in urban centers, there's a whole host of interventions you can make there as well that would reduce gun violence without actually taking away anyone's guns. And so I'm actually a little disappointed that Democrats focus so much on getting individual types of weapons off of the street or on this kind of vague gun control, because I'm not sure it's necessary to frame things or even approach the issue that way if you're trying to reduce homicides or suicides.
So, Paul Barrett, on what Jamel just said about focusing on particular types of weapons,
yes,
that big applause line for Hillary Clinton had to do with military-style assault weapons, which most people don't even know what that means.
Most people don't know what it means, and she got that applause line, and it's too bad if that's going to send her in the wrong direction. I agree with Jamel emphatically that a focus on particular types of guns because of their cosmetic appearance, military style, they're black as opposed to being made from a wooden stock like Grandpa's deer rifle. Well, Grandpa's deer rifle, round for round, is more deadly than an AR-15 so-called military-style weapon.
Really? How so?
It shoots more powerful rounds. I mean, bigger bullets that are moving more quickly and do more damage as they move through the body of your target. We have to move away from this traditional liberal notion of demonizing particular guns because they have or haven't been used in the military, and instead focus on narrowing gaps in our laws, such as the background check law, which is law already. Felons, insane people, wife beaters cannot have guns, but there are certain times when those prohibitions don't apply. Well, we've got to make them apply all across the board. It's very, very sort of common sense, and it's an emphasis on access to guns as opposed to particular models of guns.
Speaking of what liberals say, one person who could be the recipient of trouble as a result of the gun issue being raised to the fore is Bernie Sanders, who, of course, has been doing well against Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire in particular, also in Iowa. But he, coming from Vermont, a rural state, has had a decently pro-gun record as far as gun rights people are concerned, although more recently I think he gets a D from the NRA. He supported President Obama's background checks and other items bill a couple of years ago. But he says this when it comes to the issue of liability for gun manufacturers when their weapons are used in killings. Watch.
If somebody has a gun and it falls into the hands of a murderer and that murderer kills somebody with the gun, do you hold the gun manufacturer responsible? Not any more than you would hold a hammer company responsible if somebody beats somebody over the head with a hammer.
Jamel, that sounds like common sense when he puts it that way. Would Hillary Clinton disagree with him?
I actually don't think that she would, in part because of, it seems, the tenor of her approach, in part because I think her policy people see that as a no-brainer. That just doesn't make any sense. I wonder, and I don't have an answer to this, I wonder if either Sanders or Clinton would support, say, liability insurance for gun owners in the same way that we hold insurance for all sorts of things, so that not the manufacturer may not be held responsible, but if you purchased a weapon and then purchased insurance and that weapon was used in committing a crime, that you, the individual, would be responsible for it.
Because so, like, just as people have to buy liability insurance when they get a car,
right?
They would have to buy liability insurance when they get a gun. Is anybody actually proposing that?
I don't think anyone is proposing that, which is a shame, because when you think about how, say, guns get from rural counties in Illinois to Chicago, it's usually via informal contacts, via people going to purchase weapons illegally and then bringing them into cities or areas where there are tougher gun laws. So if you just make it more difficult to make those sorts of transactions, to say that, you know, if you can purchase all the guns you want out in, I live in D.C., so out in Fauquier County in Northern Virginia, but you have to purchase insurance as well, and if those guns end up in a crime in Washington, D.C., you'll be held responsible as much as the person who pulled the trigger. I think you do begin to reduce the incentive for those sorts of gun trades.
So, Paul, it's one thing for this to be in the campaign. It's another thing for the laws to actually change. I don't know if it's relevant, this other stat that I'm going to cite now, that the country has evolved to the point where just 6% of the population owns 65% of the guns. And perhaps more significantly, these owners are concentrated in a certain geographic set of geographic areas, rural and in the South. Does this make it harder or easier to actually change the law the next time somebody puts it before Congress?
Neither. It cuts both ways because of our federal system, because of the fact that we have 2 senators from each state, no matter how big the state is, and you therefore end up with red states where even if they have a Democratic senator, that senator is going to be very much influenced potentially by a small number of pro-gun activists. Secondly, while that 6% owning 65% may well be correct, I'm not familiar with that number, another very important number is between 30 and 40%, according to surveys, of American households have a gun in them. So there is a substantial minority of American households spread not just in rural, but all through the Midwest, Southwest, and so forth, big swaths of the country.
All right. Well, thank you both for this part of the discussion. On now to evidence-based politics. And yes, it's time for evidence-based politics, where we meet scholars who have studied an issue that can get oversimplified by political pronouncements. After the Oregon shootings, President Obama told the nation there's evidence gun laws can save lives.
We know that states with the most gun laws tend to have the fewest gun deaths. So the notion that gun laws don't work or just will make it harder for law-abiding citizens and criminals will still get their guns, it's not borne out by the evidence. We know that other countries, in response to one mass shooting, have been able to craft laws that almost eliminate mass shootings. Friends of ours, allies of ours, Great Britain, Australia, countries like ours. So we know there are ways to prevent it.
Is the president right that gun laws work, that there is clear evidence? To help us with that question, Mark Kleiman, professor of public policy at NYU's Marin Institute of Urban Management. He has directed criminal policy analysis at the Justice Department and advises government at all levels on crime control. And we've also asked Paul Barrett to stay on to help us think about this. He's the author of Glock, The Rise of America's Gun. Thanks, Paul, for staying on. Mark, welcome to the program.
Brian, always a pleasure.
And I actually want to put up a graphic right away. This is going to be a little hard to see on the screen to some of you, but wait till I explain it. This is so clear, actually, and it comes from National Journal. They just put this together this summer. And what we see here, and Mark Kleiman, I think you're familiar with this, is states ranked from top to bottom by how many gun laws they have and how strict their gun laws are overall. And then the black column all the way on the left is the rate of gun victimization, how many people are shot in each state. And so what we see, as we're going to go down this graphic, is that the more gun laws a state has, starting with Hawaii at the top, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, have the lowest rate of gun violence. And then as you go down this graph, and it gets thinner, states with fewer and fewer gun laws, and look how few they are, in these lower states without much blue at all on this graphic: Montana, Oklahoma, Wyoming, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. These states have the highest rate of gun crime. Mark, do we take this at face value? The more gun laws, the lower the actual gun crime?
I don't know that study. It raises hackles right away. You can't do this stuff cross-sectionally. You can't just say, what are the laws and what are the outcomes. You'd have to have some background of what level you'd expect, what level of gun death you'd expect in that state, given its demographics. You need urbanization, you need ethnicity, you need economic level, you need the level of law enforcement. I'd much rather have change over time. Now, John Donahue and some of his colleagues just did a study on concealed carry permit laws, the shell issue laws. I had strongly believed, based on earlier data, that they didn't matter at all. and therefore if people wanted them, they might as well have them. I think the new evidence, which looks at change over time, shows that the longer states have permissive concealed carry, the higher its homicide rate is, controlling for everything else and compared to its own past. So I think that's more persuasive evidence. I wouldn't take this alone. Eugene Volokh had a column in the Washington Post this morning doing the opposite. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but he showed the scatter plot was null. I think the cross-national stuff is in some ways more interesting. We have 3 times the homicide rate of any other advanced country. We have 10 times the homicide rate of Australia, which the last time I checked was another frontier origin society. Either you have to believe that Americans are uniquely evil, which I guess is now the official conservative belief, or you have to believe that there's something wrong with our gun laws, that we have so many gun homicides. I think picking out exactly what they are and doing a precise correlation of what law is going to be harder.
Some people in the political sector just throw up their hands. The president didn't. He made the case that the evidence exists, that gun laws work. But a lot of other people will say, look, the studies are all over the place. We can't tell anything from the studies because you find this one looks like it matters, this one looks like it doesn't matter, this one looks like concealed carry makes a place safer, this one looks like concealed carry makes a place more dangerous. Is there good data out of all these gazillions of studies that seem to have been done?
There's lots of good data. I mean, I think you have to worry something about the merchants of doubt phenomenon. Both on guns and on global warming, there are people who simply pay money to gin up some study so you can say there's a study on the other side. Now that we know that John Lott, invents characters and makes up surveys, I don't think we have to take his papers very seriously, particularly when people have reanalyzed them. John Lott's a scholar who actually got fired finally by the American Enterprise Institute, who was the main author of the More Guns, Less Crime thesis, simply doesn't hold up on reanalysis, really never held up the first time. I think the evidence about what particular gun laws work or don't work is scattered. It's very hard research to do. To some extent, you can rely on common sense. Right? We have a law that says you can't get a gun if you've been convicted of a felony, you've been convicted of domestic violence, you've been committed for serious mental illness. And a gun dealer has to do a background check to verify that that's true. That's the Brady law. Right? The law that you can't get a gun in those categories is an old law. The Brady law was supposed to enforce that. But there's a loophole in it, which is that if you're not a federally licensed firearm dealer, an FFL, you don't have to obey that. You can sell to somebody. About 40% of all gun transactions are by people who are not classified as professional gun dealers. Some of them aren't, but some of this is just intra-family stuff. If we required that every gun transfer go through a background check done by a federal firearm licensee, we could close that private sale loophole. That's got to make sense.
Let me bring you in on this, Paul. For your book, Locke, did you look at data on what kind of gun laws actually reduce gun violence?
Well, yes, but what I ended up looking at, including relying on writing that Mark Kleinman has done over the years, is the fact that it is very difficult to identify a single statute that was passed, say the 1994 assault weapons ban, and correlate that with any change in crime levels. It's even difficult to, according to serious scholarly standards, to look at the 1994 background check law and find out whether that can, with any degree of certainty, be correlated to lower crime rates. It's just very, very difficult to do that. And I think you have to be honest about that. And I think the president, for example, made something of an overstatement about what the evidence shows.
So in our last minute, let's get back to the politics a little bit.
But before we get to the politics, all of the focus at the moment is on gun acquisition. I think the best opportunities to reduce gun violence are focusing on gun carrying, discouraging people from carrying guns around and brandishing them. And that's the hidden agenda behind the whole stop, question, and frisk approach in policing. You're trying to deter people from carrying guns. And if we can figure out a way to do that constitutionally, it doesn't outrage the community, I think that's got a better chance of success than most of what we've been talking about so far.
But Paul, politically, you want to disagree with something that our earlier guest said about Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on that issue of treating guns like hammers. You can't sue the hammer manufacturer if somebody decides to go out and bonk somebody over the head with it. That's what Sanders says. Clinton disagrees with that?
Well, Clinton disagrees with Bernie Sanders' position, which was in favor of a 2005 law that shields the gun industry, manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers from almost all liability suits, such that if a gun manufacturer were accused in a civil lawsuit of recklessly marketing guns in a way that was likely for the guns to flow into the black market, you can't even get out of the box and start a lawsuit. That industry is uniquely protected. Hillary Clinton has called for the repeal of that law, and she's going to be bonking Bernie Sanders over the head with the fact that he supported the law in 2005.
So you would expect to see Hillary Clinton bring this up in the Democratic debate.
She already has. She's brought it up, and it's going to come up again.
In this televised debate.
That's right.
On Tuesday
But if the
night.
Democrats were smart, they'd simply keep repeating that they're for universal background checks, which 90% of the voters support, and the Republicans are all against it.
Thank you both very much. And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We are here every week at this hour calling the presidential horse race and pitting actual research against campaign rhetoric. Next time, we deconstruct the first Democratic debate. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.